Kim Novak finally confesses the truth about Tony Curtis at 92. On February 13, 1933, in Chicago, Illinois, Kim Novak was born Marilyn Pauline Novak. She started out with very little and became one of the most memorable movie stars of the 1950s and early 1960s, leaving a lasting influence on the history of film. Novak was up in a working-class Czech-American household, which was very different from the glamorous existence that would eventually define her public image. Her father was a history teacher and freight dispatcher, while her mother worked in a factory. Novak was sensitive to art and independent from a young age. These traits would affect both her profession and her personal life. She went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago because she wanted to be a commercial artist at first. She got recognized while working as a model, which changed her plans and sent her west to Hollywood. However, she didn't go there with a lot of ambition. When Columbia Pictures hired her in the early 1950s, studio chief Harry Kahn tried to make her a planned replacement for Rita Hayworth. Novak said no. She didn't like how fake Hollywood was, so she didn't alter her name to something more glamorous, and she openly fought against the strict rules of the studio system. This act of defiance, which was exceptional and dangerous for a young actress at the time, would become one of the most important parts of her life and legacy. Novak became famous quickly, but it took a lot of work to get there. In her early films, such Pushover 1954 and Picnic 1955, she had a natural screen presence and an emotional openness that set her apart from more polished, tightly controlled actors. She won a Golden Globe for Best Newcomer for her role in Picnic, which made her a serious dramatic performer. People could tell that she was different, weakness and strength blended together, sensuality moderated by self-reflection. She played the dual roles of Malini Sturr and Judy Barton in Alfred Hitchcock's 1958 classic, Vertigo, which is her most famous role. She starred alongside James Stewart. When it came out, the movie got mixed reviews, but over time, it has been known as one of the best movies ever made. Novak's performance is now seen as a key part of its eerie impact. She added depth, sadness, and emotional complexity to parts that needed her to change her identity, desire, and misery in small ways. Not many actresses could show longing and inner strife with such subtle power. Novak starred in a number of well-known movies in the late 1950s and early 1960s, such as Belle, Book, and Candle 1958, Middle of the Night 1959, Strangers When We Meet 1960, and Of Human Bondage 1964, but even though she was famous, she still didn't like it very much. The relentless scrutiny, the intrusive management of her private life, and the industry's high standards all took their toll. Novak never totally gave in to Hollywood's demands, which is why Hollywood never forgave her. In the 1980s, Kim Novak made a quiet but powerful return to the cinema, reminding people that her magnetic presence was still strong. In the TV movie Malibu, she played the elegant and mysterious Billy Farnsworth, a role that lent her a depth and emotion to a character who was sculpted by wealth, secrets, and longing. Novak showed that she was a seasoned actor who didn't need to be famous to get attention. All she needed was honesty, restraint, and an obvious screen presence. The most important thing she did in the 1980s was join the cast of the CBS Prime time soap drama Falcon Crest from 1986 to 1987. Novak played the mysterious Kit Marlowe in 19 episodes. She was a woman whose background was as murky as her reasons for being there. Novak's ability to show inner tension and emotional complexity with only a look or a pause made the role appropriate for her. People liked Kit's guarded elegance, her emotional wounds, and her quiet fortitude. These were all things that were similar to Novak's own public image as a Hollywood star who had always been hard to pin down. Producers wanted her to keep going into the next season, but Novak said no. At that time, she was very focused on writing her autobiography, which she was going to call Through My Eyes, choosing reflection and self-expression over another year in the demanding television spotlight. The Children, a British-German drama from 1990, was Novak's last big performance. She played Rose Sellers. The movie had a sad and reflective tone that was a suitable end for an actress whose later work focused more on emotional truth than on glamour. Critics liked Novak's performance because it was modest and dignified, yet it was also emotionally real. Instead of going after commercial success, she took on a project that let her look into human weakness and strength, two themes that had become more and more important in her life and career. Her last movie role was in the 1991 psychological thriller Leam, when she played Lillian Anderson Masson, a lady who is dying and struggling with memory, loss, and unfulfilled love. The part was hard and emotionally draining, but the things that happened behind the scenes were much worse. Novak and director Mike Figgis apparently had a lot of arguments, which made the production quite unpleasant for her. What could have been a meaningful goodbye to the movies turned into a tiring and depressing process. That bad event had a long-lasting effect. Novak turned down a later offer from famous French director Claude Berry because he was unhappy with the creative difficulties and pressures of modern cinema. She was also up for a remake of Belle and Candle, the movie that had made her a screen star. But the project never got off the ground. Novak made a big decision when she saw chances that no longer excited her and an industry that had evolved in ways that left her tired. She didn't want to go through another round of concessions, so she left Hollywood for good, concluding her lengthy, often rocky journey on her own terms. In the middle of the 1950s, when Kim Novak was at the height of her celebrity and desirability, her personal life was as spectacular and turbulent as any Hollywood movie. Her love relationships brought her into contact with powerful, controversial, and groundbreaking people, showing both the good and bad sides of the studio system that defined her career. One of these relationships was with Ramfis Trujillo, the infamous son of Dominican dictator Rafael Leonidas Trujillo. This connection showed how Novak's fame attracted men who were used to having power and privilege outside of the movie industry. Her connection with famed musician Sammy Davis Jr.B. in 1957 was even more important. It broke one of Hollywood's most strict and terrible rules, race. At a time when interracial partnerships were not only frowned upon, but also deliberately discouraged. The connection of Novak and Davis became a flashpoint for racial bias, institutional fear, and violent intimidation. A BBC documentary says that Colia Pictures boss Harry Kahn used mob ties to end the relationship because he wanted to safeguard Novak's carefully crafted screen image and avoid a scandal. Reports say that Davis was threatened with terrible violence, such being blinded or having his leg smashed, if he didn't marry a black woman within 48 hours. The story is still one of the most terrifying examples of how the studio system controlled actors' personal life. It had a lasting impression on everyone involved, showing the harsh truths behind Hollywood's glittering surface. People were always interested in Novak's love life over the years. She was connected to a number of famous people, such as actor Michael Brandon, basketball star Wilt Chamberlain, and British actor David Hemmings. Relationships that showed how many friends she had and how free she was from social norms. She was engaged to director Richard Quinn in 1959. They worked together creatively and had a romantic relationship. The engagement didn't end in marriage, though. It wasn't until years later that Novak got married for the first time. She married English actor Richard Johnson on March 15, 1965. Their marriage, which lasted just a short time and ended in divorce on May 26, 1966, was based on respect for each other, not anger. It's amazing that the two stayed friends after they broke up. This shows how graceful and emotionally mature Novak is, even when romances end. In that same year, Novak made a choice that would change his life forever. She left Hollywood. She moved to Big Sur, California, because she was tired of the pressures of the industry and wanted to live a simpler, more real life. There, in a place with rough coastlines and beautiful nature, she started a completely new life, raising horses, painting, and getting back in touch with herself. She was in movies from time to time, but she stopped wanting to be famous and started wanting to be happy and express herself artistically. In 1974, fate stepped in the most surprising way. One of Novak's prized Arabian mares got colic. Robert Malaloy, a horse doctor, was called to come to the house. That regular meeting with a professional turned into a deep and lasting affection. Malaloy, who was down to earth and caring, gave Novak a partnership that was very different from the glitz and manipulation she had known before. On March 12, 1976, the pair was married, and with this marriage, Novak got 2 adult stepchildren and embraced family life with love and dedication. Novak and Malloy built a log cabin along the Williamson River in Kiloquin, Oregon. It was a quiet getaway that marked her final and full exit from the spotlight of Hollywood. There, her life was shaped by nature, creativity, and emotional stability. Their marriage lasted more than 40 years, even though she was no longer under the watchful eye of studio contracts and the public. An unusual and deep success story after a life full of change and difficulty. Robert Malloy died on November 27, 2020, bringing to a close a long and loved time in Novak's life. Still, their cooperation and Novak's bravery in choosing authenticity over popularity are strong examples of her strength. Her journey through love, sorrow, and self-discovery tells the story of a Hollywood star and a woman who took back control of her life on her own terms. Kim Novak, who is 92 years old, looks back on Hollywood's golden age with a clarity that only time can give. Distance has healed old wounds, taken away myths, and let her talk as a real lady who went through a time when people had to be quiet, do what they were told, and give up things. Tony Curtis is still one of the most interesting and misunderstood people in her life. Even though she worked with many famous people early in her career, people have sought a fairy tale for a long time. Novak thinks they needed chemistry that was easy to understand and glamour that didn't have any bad effects. But that's not how real life works. And Tony didn't either. Curtis was already a growing star when Novak came to Hollywood. He was a perfect example of the charm and unpredictability of 1950 seconds celebrity. He was good-looking, driven, and quite conscious of how attractive he was. Novak remembers that he was both interested in and afraid of him. Tony was always on the move. She claims he could light up a room as soon as he stepped in, yet he was always moving. He was always after something, like love, excitement, or approval, and sometimes he didn't know which one he desired the most. Like many studio-era relationships, their relationship was always under watch. Publicists wrote stories, photographers set up scenes, and executives watched how people acted. Novak remembers how little privacy young actors had. You didn't just go out with someone, she says, you went out with them in the news, in gossip columns, and in whispers behind the soundstage doors. What Novak now talks about the most is how different Curtis was in private and in public. She argues that the world saw Tony the movie star, but I saw Tony, the insecure boy who never really thought he was good enough. She talks about him without being angry, recognizing all his good and bad points. He could be very nice, hilarious, and giving 1 minute, and then the next he would be distant or defensive. He didn't get better from being famous. It only made his anxieties louder. Novak also talks about rumors that have been around for a long time, and he chooses to be honest instead being dramatic. She agrees that there was enthusiasm, but there was also competitiveness, ego, and stress. We were both young, both under the grip of studios, and both attempting to make it in a system that valued lies more than truth. She doesn't like the simple stories that used to tell their story. Novak believes that people want to call someone a villain or a heartbreaker, but Tony wasn't a bad person. He was a man who had been sculpted by his history, by poverty, by ambition, and by a Hollywood system that pushed him to do too much and not think about it. Novak talks about the emotional toll of loving someone who was always on the go, which is probably the most touching part of the book. She says she needs depth, stillness, and realness. Tony did well while things were moving. We were both right. We just didn't get along. Now that he's older and wiser, Novak doesn't keep a grudge. She says softly, I don't regret knowing him. He was a part of my life and my education. Tony taught me what I couldn't accept and what I wouldn't give up. She stops for a moment before adding one last thought, one that looks back on the past with kindness. I think Tony would want to be understood, not worshipped, if he were alive today. And that's the truth that people need. Not the stories, not the rumors, but the person who is really there. Kim Novak, who is 92, no longer feels the need to maintain anyone else's or Hollywood's illusions. By being honest about Tony Curtis, she gives us something much more valuable than gossip, a new way of looking at things. And by doing this, she reminds us that every golden era relationship has a complicated, fragile, and very human tale behind it.